Y'all, wearing my red hats that I can't wear red hats anymore, because it's not a good look anymore to me. Um, but I wanted to talk about something that had to do with some red hat wearing people. Um, it's the thoughts and prayers. When there's been a shooting, where many people die. Uh, the answer to that is, from the right side is thoughts and prayers. Not how do we get rid of guns? How do we stop the violence? Thoughts and prayers. I mean, what are those thoughts and prayers that you're having when you have that? I have a feeling that I think I know what they're thinking and what they're praying. They're thinking, please don't be a white Christian man who did the shooting because I don't want it to come back on me. And, I just think that that's the only thing they could possibly be thinking. And and most of the shooters are in fact white men, that's going on there. So, I mean, they want it. They really, really want it to be somebody. So, I mean, they immediately, when there's a shooting somewhere, um, they'd immediately start targeting the other side, trying to blame them, saying it's a trans person or somebody with dark skin or something like that. They just really would love there to be a shooting where they can blame somebody other than white men. It's not women shooting either, it's white men shooting. And then the white men, instead of resolving the issue and going to our politicians and changing our laws the way that they did in in Japan and the way they did it in Australia, and the way they did it in other places that they got rid of shooting violence by getting rid of guns. But the gun lobbyists own our government, and they probably own as much of the Democrat. Well, they don't own as much Democrat as they do Republicans. The Republicans are far more gun nuts than anybody else. But I wanted to talk about this thoughts and prayers thing a little bit, or a rant about it. Either or. Um, I'm what I'm going to say. The thing I'm going to talk about. Before I do it, I'm going to tell you I'm not going to say anything about my own religion, my own faith. So don't make any assumptions. You don't know anything about my faith. You don't know what I believe in. Seriously, you don't. You know, but the religious right has me wondering things. And at the risk of being called more names, because some MAGA people have been getting on my YouTube channel and thoroughly lambasting me for things that had nothing to do with what my YouTube videos were about. But they do their deflection where they talk about something where they think they're right, so they'll talk about that and ignore the fact that my last video, for example, was about saving Social Security. Not one of the comments had to do about Social Security. They totally ignored that, and they just went off on tangents that had nothing to do with what my video was about. But so at the risk of being called more names, I want to talk about the religious right, and it is something that I give some thought about. I've written 14 books, and two of them take place in hell. One's called Halliburton. It's where Dick Cheney and George Bush have taken over hell in their search for weapons of mass destruction. And the other one's called Lucifer's, where Lucifer is trying to take over heaven, and by attacking. It's a long story, but so I thought about it. So a lot of thought went into heaven and hell and all that when I wrote those books, and even one of my short stories that I had written recently had to do with the animals on the ark. Um, Very upset because God wiped out all the animals on Earth, except for two of each because of something that mankind did. So the animals were not happy about that. So that was a fun story to write. But it makes me think, and it makes me think about what is out there. I mean, like, why do Adam and Eve in drawings have belly buttons? They're created from nothing. They didn't need an umbilical cord, so why do they have belly buttons? In the drawings that people show of them, and why don't they have, like, long beards and really hairy legs and hairy underarms and everything like that? Somehow they got shaved, um, and they look very clean shaven and everything. So and even that gets me thinking. God was, they say that um, men were made in their image, but women weren't. So God is supposed to look like a man. So I mean, does he have junk? Does he go pee? I know that sounds disrespectful to say that, but when you're a humor writer and you're writing things like that, you look at things like that. And by the way, going back to all my books, in none of my books do I ever take God's name or Jesus' name in vain. I never say the F word either. I mean, there's plenty of cussing, there's plenty of stuff going on in my books, there's murder and things in a couple of my books. But, there are lines that I just chose not to cross with it, and those were certain ones like that. But it all of this gets me wondering about the non-truths that are in religion. Like, I, for one, totally believe dinosaurs existed. And if you talk to most Christians, they think not, and because it's not in their Bible or anything, and they go, oh no, we're only 5,000 years old, the whole planet. That goes against my thoughts and beliefs in science, which says that this place is millions and millions of years old, and dinosaurs existed. So I mean, and that's my viewpoint. Um, but I think I'm right. But then they think they're right too. So who's to know? But let's talk about things where they're wrong. If because they think they're right about things like that, like Sundays, for example. They believe that's the holy day of rest and all that. That was something made up by people hundreds and hundreds of years after Jesus Christ. But it was not something that was in the Bible. It wasn't in the New Commandment. In the New Testament. I'm sorry, New Testament or anything like that. That was just something that people made up after the fact. People that even make money doing religious things. And you can even look at Thursday. Thursday was Thor's Day. That's based on a different god. From a different religion. So you have to be careful what you pay attention to, or pay attention to it and learn things. Before you believe things. Like, for example, the King James Bible. That was made in 1604. 1,600 years after, the 0 year. And as it was made by a king who was trying to get people to do things in a certain way. So it's a royal Bible, and Trump has to be really jealous about that. King James Bible, he wants his King Trump Bible. But anyway, a lot of things that are in that Bible. I mean, he told people what to put in the Bible. So, do you believe it? Do you believe everything that's in that Bible? Jesus' birthday, for example, December 25th. He was not born on December 25th. That day was created by Constantine, who was a sun worshiper, and that's also where Sunday comes from. But that was created for, just purely on their own, for reasons other than when Jesus' birthday actually was. Most people believe that he was born somewhere around July or something like that, but definitely not on Christmas. So when they say that Christmas Eve and Christmas, that's Jesus' birthday, that's a not an out lie. And I don't like being lied to. I don't appreciate when people try to mislead me on purpose on things. And let's even get to how Jesus looked. And actually, let's go back a step. His name was not Jesus. His name was Yeshua, I believe. The Greeks renamed him. His name was not Jesus at all. So they made that up, again, being lied to. And then they show him, he looks European, with flowing brownish blonde hair, blue eyes. No. Most likely he had olive to brown skin, and he didn't have the flowing hair. In fact, he's never described in any of the books, except one place. And that would be in Revelation 1.14 or 1-14, however you want to say it. And it said the hair on his head was white like wool. So they described his hair as wool in more than one part of that. And wool hair would be, he basically had an afro. So he had dark skin, he had an afro. And that gets me to think these religious right people there, would they still be praying to their God if they had a picture on a cross of a dark-skinned man with an afro, would they still be doing it? I don't know. I'm not them, so I don't know what they would do or not. But they need to know that the face of the person that's on the cross that most of them are looking at is not accurate, and it's just simply you didn't have white Caucasian people in that part of the world. He is dark skinned, and people need to know that, and they just won't say it because they're white and they don't want people to believe anything different than that. And and it's also interesting that they compared it to snow, because I don't think there's a lot of snow in that, in Israel, although the higher elevations there do in fact have snow, so maybe it's accurate on things. But and they also said, the other part of that is they said that his feet were glowing bronze like in a furnace. So again, that's darker skin, So the only parts of the Bible that talk about how he looks have wool and brownish, bronze-like skin, so darker skin. And the other thing is a lot of religious books have like quotes and things from him. There's no quote anywhere by Jesus. I'm going to say Jesus rather than his real name on there, just because it's easier to remember for me and communicate with you. But most of the quotes that are about him are to fit agendas for the people who wrote it. And there are many different quotes that they have, and they change drastically depending on which Bible versions that you're reading. King James will say the one things. All the Gospels, have different descriptions of things. So when people are quoting Jesus, they're not quoting him. They don't know what he said. They know what it's what churches said centuries later. It's not what Jesus said. And then going back to Jesus, it's amazing to me again that you can be, I'm going to say, a gun nut and be Christian at the same time, because guns are to kill people, and they're going to say, oh, it's for defense, but karate is for defense. You can use, you could have a gun in your house for defense, but you don't need an assault rifle or anything like that. You just don't need that kind of thing, and you don't need to take those into stores with you when you go. Jesus, I just don't think that if they were wearing a gun and standing next to Jesus, that he would support what they're doing. Now some of the people had swords and things, so I'm not saying he was totally against any kind of weapon or anything, but I just think that he would not feel about guns the way people on the religious right feel about guns. And I'm sure that if he saw ICE agents out there, he would not support them going in and just grabbing people off the streets, imprisoning them, separating them from their family. Would Jesus want that? I just, I'm, and then or getting rid of health care. I mean, everything Jesus ever talked about was taking care of people. Health care is something I would think he would be completely 1,000% behind, and we need it. And I think it would be something he would be for. And I wonder, what would he said if he'd have seen a liar standing with a Bible in front of a church that's supposedly to worship him? So I kind of think he would have had a sense of humor about it, but I don't think he would have supported it, and it wouldn't have been right in his mind. But he would have turned the other cheek. And I wonder what he would think about the Bible himself if he actually read the Bible and went. I just have a feeling if Jesus read that, he'd be going, no, I don't think that. No, that didn't happen. No, no, no. I don't think he would agree with the things that are in the Bible. He would agree with some of the sentiment of the Bible. Turning the other cheek and taking care of people and doing all that. But I just don't see the religious right gun nuts supporting that. um, or racism. It's just so many of them are racist, and there's no way that he would support racism against anyone by anyone. They're all people, and he would want them all to be protected and taken care of. Um, it's and then the other thing I think about these people who are racist, and I want to ask you a question. If you're a racist, if you're a racist and you think you're better than a brown skinned person of any kind, well, I don't know what kind, and you needed an organ or you would die, would you take an organ from somebody that was of a different race? Would you refuse it simply because you feel that they're inferior to you? I don't know. So this whole thing about thoughts and prayers really got me thinking, about what Jesus would want. And I know in my own heart that he would not want guns. He would not want people, he would not want mass shootings. And that's the last thing he would want. And if he knew about that, and I think all these people like Mike Johnson, who's supposed to be so religious, and in Congress, why all he ever does is thoughts and prayers instead of doing what he's supposed to do, which is to fix it. Get rid of these guns. Stop it. Make this not happen. Do what places that got rid of guns did, and they don't have the murders and everything that we have. They don't have the mass shootings that we have. They don't have any of that stuff. I think you need to really, really live by that Bible that you believe in. Go ahead and believe in it. So like I said, you don't know my beliefs on anything, on any of this, but I have looked into things. I try to understand things. I try to understand other people and what they're thinking. And for the religious right gun nuts, I don't understand what you're thinking. I really don't. So anyway, I'm sure I'm going to get some nasty comments from people who disagree with my feeling about this kind of thing, and try to keep it on what I'm talking about this time, and maybe think about what I'm saying this time. So don't deflect into something that has nothing to do with what I'm talking about now, unless you want to go back and talk about the Social Security from my last video. That's fine too. If you want to circle back to that, I'll come back to that, because my way of fixing it would have fixed it. Get rid of the cap. So anyway, thank you everyone for watching and listening. My website, www.normcowie.com. Take care, and believe in what you will. I am fine with whatever you believe in religiously. Whatever faith you're in, do it. That's fine with me. But don't use it as a reason to kill people. Just don't do that. All right. Take care, everybody. Bye.